evening, everybody.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Kirk Kennedy and Strack the Wolverine, and we don't have an Angela Yee that we can pivot off of. We got the microphone. My mic sounds nice. Check one. My mic sounds nice. Check
Check
two.
two.
Ladies and gentlemen, cross-examine. Back like we never left. Avenging our brother's last breath. All of it, right? We here, baby. We here. It took a long time. Shouldn't have left you without a strong show to step through. You know how it is. It's a lot going on, man. We actually did something.
Lost you. Lost you. We lost you. Mic checker 1 2 1 2. We live on the show, but we can't hear you. I can't hear you. Yibby yibby y'all. Your mic is muted. Joint shows that your mic is muted. I don't know why. Everybody, we live. Psych.
As we
There he is. There he is.
to give you what you need. Now 5. Dun, dun. Ready to die. Dun, dun. As we proceed to give you what you need. JM. Dun, dun. Who shot ya? Separate the weak from the opsa. Lead hard to creep the Brooklyn streets. It's on, player. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. You know what I'm saying? Technical difficulties. Here we go. We ready, man. We ready. Bang, bang. Who shot you? Kirk Kennedy, Strack the Wolverine. Man, we got something to talk to y'all about tonight.
Yeah.
We got to talk to you, man. Can we have a conversation? We might get on our R&B tonight, man. We still need to do that podcast on marriage and sex and all that. We need to do that.
We do. Definitely.
Need to do that and have that Backstreet in the background. Before I let you go away, can I get a kiss tonight? I'm telling you, boy, that's the joint.
They hit that harmony right too. That
hey,
tonight,
did they?
Oh, right.
Man, and I forgot the lead singer's name. And when he came in with that,
Yeah.
maybe I've been thinking on so very long. See, y'all don't got that type of music. Did they make any Christian like love music? Like I'm not talking about love Jesus, right? I'm talking about like make babies music for believers. Do they got that? Or do you just got to pretend like Luther is really talking about? Do you know of anything like that?
Nah, I mean I can't think of anything off top. I know Show Baraka had a joint on his last album that he was talking about that though. Like he was talking about it was an adult thing. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know about Chauncey Black. I don't know who that is. Is that a real dude? That sounds like a name I'd make up. We need that smoke.
It do sound like a
What's the update on that show? Guess who's back? Yeah, we still working through that one, baby. Don't worry about it. Guess who's back? It's gonna be pictures of people's backs, and we still trying to decide if they should be shirtless or not. Some of them. And you guess whose back it is for some cash prizes. That's how we do it. You know what I'm saying? He said, my guy Jazz Digger. That's Brandon. Brandon is on tick tonight. He said, my guy Jazz
got some R&B, huh?
Jazz Digger got some R&B. You know, so Jazz Digger is that nigga, right? That's what you said.
Okay.
Jazz Digger might, man. That's your dude, though. You might be biased. That might be your. You know, I need to peep something. Send me an MP3 or something. Let me and my wife test it out and see what we think about it, and we'll get back to you. You know what I'm saying? That's right. That's right. Chauncey Black. That was his name. The Backstreet dude. That was the joint. Before I've been thinking. See, they don't sing like that no more, man. They don't do that no more. I don't know. Now they say take them to church, and these members don't be saved at all. You know what I'm saying? Somebody said sound is going in and out. Are you sure it's not your device? Don't have us squirming off the technical difficulties, and it might be your joint. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, I hope.
Let's get into it, man. TD Jakes satin sheets. That's what I'm talking about, baby. TD Jakes. I remember one time I watched TD Jakes one time, bro.
Just one time?
I watched him one,
Just one time?
Yeah, I learned from him all the time. I tell you, I plagiarize his sermons on Sundays. I watched this dude, man, one time teaching the sermon, and it was about, what did he say? It was about David and something. Oh no, it was about Samson. And Samson was like, had gotten tied up by the Philistines in his head. And then why this dude, I'm talking about this is no lie. Why the dude, right after he was describing Samson got tied up, and TD Jakes can talk with a lot of voice and a lot of reverberation in his voice, and the people just love to hear him talk. Mm-hmm. And he said, and Samson got tied up by the Philistines. Sometimes God just wants to get you all tied up. Sometimes you need to be all tied up in order for God to be able to cut your hair and take you away from the pride. And man, people was fired up. And he said, he talked about being all tied up for 22 minutes. Me and my wife looked at each other and said, golly.
You know what be tied up.
You know what the application for me was? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. That's a different episode. You know what the application for me was? I mean, I spent 15 minutes just growing and making my shoelaces a little tighter. Word. I was like, man, what are you talking about all tied up? You know what I'm saying? Said TD Jakes sounds like Vody Bakum with a lisp, no lie. Yeah. Vody Bakum always sounds like he's in the Vody talks like he preaches like he's right at the scene before the horror, the killers get ready to kill the person. That build up in the music. And when the thing is happening, and then all of a sudden, brother, and then it's just and then he's talking like this and he's preaching, and it feels like the killers get ready to rise up and kill a person, and that's how Vody sounds. With no lisp. You know what I'm saying? All right. We got an episode for y'all. First of all, before we jump into that, let's get into I need to say one thing. A couple weeks ago when we had Ambassador on the show, we talked about the 76ers. And we talked about, and me and you talked about the game that was coming up with the Nets and all that. We was excited for that possible, what that was going to look like. And so I missed the first part of it because I was a little bit busy, but I couldn't wait, man, to turn that game on. And I turned the TV on, and I thought something was wrong with my TV. I thought my eyes was fuzzy because when I turned it on, Philly was getting smacked in that joint. And I realized, oh wow, this is one of them smacks that, like, when you hit somebody and they running and the lady still keeps hitting them while they running away. It was one of them type of joints. Like I don't know how you felt. What was the mood in Philly like? It felt like the people who were booing got booed eventually. What was the mood like? What was the talk radio like the next morning?
The talk was like, yo, this freaking Nets team showed up and is shooting at 60+%. Like, that's crazy. That's what the talk was. They just showed up and, proved that they was the better team, fam. It's just a wrap. I mean, there was nothing they could do about it. The Sixers was not going to win that game no matter what.
And what's funny was Ben, like you said that, Ben hadn't even been to any games, but he showed up in Philly.
Right.
So, but you know what? You mentioned that the mental duress might be his, like, get out of jail free. I don't think he can use it because he wasn't affected at all.
Not at all.
As a matter of fact, Brooklyn was like, where Brooklyn at?
He was laughing on the sideline. Him and what's his name? The center we gave up.
Andre Drummond.
They was dying on the sideline, fam. I couldn't even be mad at him. I was like, yep, you deserve that laugh. Just go ahead and laugh it up. Because them boys, they showed up and just destroyed the Sixers, man. Sixers look terrible. They
Yeah,
look
man.
terrible that
Philly,
game.
Philly looked like they was getting ready. They looked like they was listening to Vody, and all of a sudden, then the basketball is coming, and then the villain comes up right behind, brother. Right,
I don't know. They might have been listening to TD Jakes. It was all tied up. Real rap.
and
It was
you know
all
what? You
tied
know
up.
who Vody sounds like? Vody sounds like Hulk Hogan a little bit, bro.
Hulk
You
Hogan.
know, remember before, remember Hulk Hogan before he got real hype,
You
right? He's like
stupid.
this. Well, you know, brother, I've been taking the vitamins, brother, and been working out and been pumping iron, brother. And I'm ready to go. Before he got hyped, that's how Vody preaches. Well, you know, the Lord is just coming down and making sure, brother. And all of a sudden, brother, the Lord's going to come
Dude,
back, brother. And then he's going
that's crazy.
Strack still got some fundamentalists in him. You don't want to make fun of Vody. I will. I'll do that, George. I'm not tripping off that dude. All right, let's talk about the Batman, brother. I know
Yeah.
you saw the Batman. You are the Latino Siskel and Ebert. You and Flo are Siskel and Eberta. Y'all see everything, man. Y'all. So what'd you think of the Batman?
I can't give my opinion yet, man. I saw it, but
You need to
I
see it
kind of
again?
yeah, I need to see it again. Yeah, I did say I've been saying that. I mean, it's been 2 weeks now. I need to watch it again. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait until it comes out, digitally, and I can grab it, and then I'll give.
So
my
you ain't gonna
opinion
say
first.
nothing until then? You don't got no
Now, I
thoughts?
mean, we talked about it a little bit. How the joint was
Mhm.
like, the a smash together of Batman and Saul. You remember that whole convo? You
But
know what
I
I'm
ain't see
saying?
it yet when we said that. You was telling me I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I just saw it this past
it
Sunday.
would be unfair for me to give my opinion right now. It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't in it like I should have been. It was a crazy.
Oh, you was tired and all. There was a lot going
Yeah,
on. So
yeah.
okay,
Yep.
it was that.
I
Then.
need to. I
Okay.
need to watch it again. Yeah.
All right, then say that. Don't make it. Don't
That's what I
make it seem. Now
said.
you said, man, I need to watch it again as if it was. You gotta wait till. Nah, you wasn't focused.
Oh,
That's
okay.
different. That's a different thing. Nah, when you tired and you dozing
I need
off.
to watch it again so I can give my opinion. My bad.
Right.
Let me clarify. I
Right.
must watch it again because I was unfocused when I saw it the
Right.
first time.
No, but some people say like I want to watch it again because to get like for me it's like okay I liked it, but for me to really put it up, I want to because other movies I've said were vicious. I've seen more than once,
Yeah.
so I want to watch it again because of that. It wasn't because I just wasn't all there and couldn't really focus on it. It was like okay, this one was tough. I
Yeah,
liked it.
it would be an unfair assessment.
Yeah, but I want to watch it again just to see because my visceral thoughts are it's probably up there as the toughest or one of the toughest DC Comics joints.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
I think DC Comics is slumming a little bit. To me, you got the Batman, you got Wonder Woman, the first joint, and you got Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League, the 3.5 hour joint.
Right. Which was
All
dope.
tough.
Yeah.
Everything else to me, so but I want to watch it again and give that full. So I feel that's why I was saying you might be thinking the way I'm thinking. I want to get that full joint, but it was good, man. It was worth the first round. So if it wasn't, I wouldn't go see it again. I want to see it again if it wasn't good enough the first round. That's what I would say. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's get into our topic of discussion. Last week we talked about, which was interesting. And then 2 days ago we did just a brief live on sort of just processing, the John MacArthur. It wasn't really just John MacArthur stuff, right? We used that as the pivot for a larger concern about just how believers overreact, respond to these things, right? So,
Right.
And I appreciated the feedback that we got from y'all on that, just talking to us about it. And then with the podcast last week, we were talking about just mercy. Where does the theology and mercy come from? Does mercy spring from your theology, right? And we were just talking about stuff like that, and it was a great episode. I appreciated the feedback I got from it.
Yeah, it was good.
When we did an episode 2 days ago, the little short, we said that what we're talking about is going to segue into this episode. And I've been waiting to do this episode for some time, so I hope we do it justice because I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this. And obviously, so I'm going to say this now on the front end. when I communicate things. I don't qualify every single thing I say because I think it takes away from the point that you're trying to make. So if I say the church, I don't mean every single Christian or every single, but I'm going to talk in categorical terms because that's just that helps the emphasis that I'm making. So it doesn't mean that I think every Christian thinks this way. Every Christian doesn't have the exact same experience. Every Christian, but when I say the church, I just mean a good bit of people that I came in contact with, I saw affected by certain things. That's usually how I communicate when I say that. So I want to communicate that so that you know that, so that I'm not slandering the bride, or so that Strack isn't having to come behind me and speak for the people who may think I'm talking about certain things that when I'm speaking specifically, no one. First of all, there's no one you listen to. I don't care who you respect. There's no one you listen to that knows what everyone is thinking, right? Or that knows what. So whenever you hear your favorite theologian critique the church, or even when we talk, oh, the black people need to stop this, or white evangelicals, like you can't be talking about everyone, right? So we understand that's how communication works. Having said that, let's have a real conversation about a topic that I thought is very interesting. That both Strack and I have looked at some of the history of this topic, but I think has actually, it started off very well intentioned, but I think it paved the way and created the kind of society we see within the evangelical church, particularly the Reformed branch of the evangelical church. So many of you would know this, but there was a fad that was, and it didn't seem like a fad, but it was a movement. It was a movement, and
Huge
it
movement.
it was huge movement, and it was acronymed by three guys in the 1990s, and we'll get into the history of it. But the words were simply, and you guys know this. The words were, what would Jesus do? Okay. And it was an acronym, it became an acronym called WWJD. Tonight, we want to ask the question, well, what happened to that movement? And then what's its legacy? What's its impact on the church today? Is there any impact on the church today? I think there is. And I think Strack thinks there is. Before we get into all that, we got to make sure they know that we back to the grill again, back to the grill again, season 4, episode 18,
Yes.
WWJD and me.
They
Me,
say
me, me, you
Ocho. Yo,
as
yo.
well. All right. So we're going to be talking about this. Now, let me tell you just a quick, um, some quick thoughts that like this WWJD, what would Jesus do, came around actually in 1890 by a pastor named Charles Sheldon. He originated this phrase. He was teaching to his church, and he wanted to help his church grow in there. And he really had a conviction that if the world, Christian and non-Christian, was asking this question, that it would have great impact on society. So he taught a sermon series about what would Jesus do. These sermons were published around 1896, and What Would Jesus Do became worldwide. He had a book called In His Footsteps that they say is the most read Christian book outside of the Bible,
Hmm.
right? So this is a big deal. Now, What Would Jesus Do? It became an acronym, WWJD, and it spawned a whole commercial movement of movies, books, different things like what would Jesus drive, who would Jesus bomb. I mean, we'll get into this, but it really took on a life of its own. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this, and we want to talk about what is the impact, what's the lasting impact on WWJD. It's very sparse now. It's almost an afterthought now. It was something that was the main way that Christians viewed the world, sort of, and the world viewed Christians is what through the lens of Jesus. Now, to take the words of Paul in Philippians 1, I felt like there was a time where in the mid 90s when this kind of when it blew up, right? There was a time where this, what would Jesus do? WWJD was almost like a mini gospel presentation. It functioned in a way where people were aware of it and Jesus's name was there and people understood what it meant, even if it was a fad to them, right? Which it did. We'll get to this in a minute, sort of what it became. And I'm with Paul when, listen, if people are going to promote the name of Christ in the gospel, I'm with it. I don't care if they're doing it for commercial gain because Christ can
Facts.
use that. That's the
Facts.
same thing I think about Kanye. If Kanye's
Jesus is king.
really not
Exactly.
a
Yep.
Jesus King, that's the same way I felt. I don't know if he's really a believer or not. I think he had a moment. I think he had a real conversion moment. Uh, his life now, he seems to be backtracking. It happens, right? But what he did was he brought attention to Jesus in a
Mm-hmm.
way that no one has. I think, to be honest with you, bro, since WWJD.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a
I
good
don't
point.
think there's been any significant emphasis on Well, no, wrong. So you got WWJD, then you got Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge movie. It brought, because Mel Gibson was a superstar back then, more so now. It brought a lot of attention to Jesus. A lot of people were talking about that thing.
Yeah.
So I'd say The Passion of the Christ, that's 2004. And then and then around that same time, Kanye drops Jesus Walks, right? So
I think
he drops Jesus Walks.
before WWJD would have been like the Jesus is my homie movement. You know that he's a that the whole T-shirt with the thumbs up.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
That was a little something coming off of the '70s, like
Yeah,
the
well, yeah, you had a
the hippie
significant
Jesus
Jesus
movement.
movement in the
Yeah,
70s,
yeah,
100%.
yeah,
That was a big movement and a lot of conversion. It was an
yeah,
explosion for dispensationalism. So
yeah.
Tim LaHaye's books and the great late Planet Earth and, all those
I
books
mean, the
kind of
hippies was
blew
all
up.
over that. You know, it was a
Right,
hippie movement. The Jesus flowers. You know, was like
right.
was big.
Hippies were getting smacked and thought
Yeah,
that they were with the transfiguration, right? They was just out of their minds. So you got the big Jesus movement in the 70s, then a total just boom, it's over, right? You don't really hear it.
right.
I think it gave birth to a lot of the CCM style, like so. And
Oh
then
yeah.
you get what would Jesus do blows up in
Yep.
sort of late 80s. It starts in late 80s and then it blows up in the mid 90s
Yeah. All
and
throughout the '90s for
all throughout
sure.
the 90s. And then it kind of fizzles out in Century 21. And then you have the Passion of the Christ. And then I would say Kanye West conversion coupled with Sunday services, Jesus is King, are the four major moments where Jesus is clearly out there. Whether people believe him or not, the fact that it's
Yeah.
out there is there.
In our lifetimes, yeah, definitely.
In our lifetime, yeah. So you get this. So let's talk about what would Jesus do, its origin, because the history of what would Jesus do is actually incredible.
Mhm.
It's actually incredible. So you got in the 1890s a congregational church minister named Charles Spurgeon. He took this concept to the pulpit. And this is what happened. What he did
Charles
was
Sheldon.
Charles
Sheldon. He
Sheldon. I'm
said,
sorry,
yeah,
Charles Sheldon.
yeah.
Right. He
Spurgeon did
he.
do a lot of things, but he ain't credited with this one.
Yeah. Right. So Charles Sheldon, what he did was, here's how it started. He created these short stories, and one of them was about a reverend named Henry Maxwell. And the story was a homeless person walks into the church, right? And they're singing this song, all to Jesus or something like that. And everyone stops and looks at this homeless guy. And he says, I've been hearing your singing from outside, and I don't know what it means. And so as people started to tell him, oh, I mean, and he said, no, that's not what I mean. I don't know what it means because I see Christians. I've been sitting on the corner freezing and hungry and no one's giving me anything. I lost my family. I had to give my children away because I couldn't support them. And not one Christian or one church came to help me. So if is this what Jesus would do? Is this, when you sing about these things, is this what Jesus would do, right? He says this to the congregation and it kind of shocks them. And then he dies 2 or 3 days later. He just drops dead. and they find out about this, and it spawns this movement. Now, this is a made up story, but he's telling these stories coupled with sermons in a series that developed into his book
Was
called,
that
I
was
think
his version of the Good Samaritan?
that was his, basically, it was his parable. It was a Good
Right.
Samaritan story. What it did, though, what it did was it allowed for Christians to experience a degree of conviction and start to take seriously the idea of how do we take what Jesus would do and put it in the mainstream. This guy, Charles Sheldon, was seriously convinced that, practically speaking, that Christians need to be living for Jesus
Mm-hmm.
and and making what Jesus would do the aim of their lives, and it would change the world. All right. Now, he was also, because of this, he was a prominent figure in what people would call the social gospel movement, right? But here's what his emphasis. His emphasis was this. It was the building of the kingdom of earth. This is what he said. We want to build the kingdom on earth through the application of Christian principles to society's problems, right? I don't have a problem with that. That was his perspective. This is what he was trying to do. So he engaged in social reform. He was actually passionate about equality and prohibition. Now, this was like this. I thought this was interesting. I don't know if you what you thought about this. This is what I thought was interesting. His his social justice perspective in applying what he thought Jesus would do was so significant that he, along with a few other people, but mainly him, got the 18th Amendment in the Constitution. Okay. Now, many of you don't know what the 18th Amendment was. All right. So let me explain what the 18th Amendment was and then how significant it was. The 18th Amendment, it was ratified on January 16th, 1919, as the result of years of advocacy by the temperance movement, which is sort of what followed his "What Would Jesus Do" perspective. They call themselves the temperance movement. All right. They what they did was they created an amendment, had Congress pass an amendment that banned alcohol. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after that came the Volstead Act that was established by the federal government that enforced a national prohibition on alcohol. Right. Now, years later, 20 years later, the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why was because people were still drinking.
Yeah.
You had a black market, right? Where Al Capone and those guys, that was their thing. Their thing was alcohol. They weren't doing cocaine and heroin and all. It was alcohol. Alcohol was the cocaine. It was the
Yeah.
heroin back then.
For sure.
And the mafia was just all this backdoor dealing. It was a lot of violence. Many of us
Bootlegging.
was bootlegging.
Yeah.
Many of us know about the legacy of Al Capone and the mafia in that time. So it became unenforceable, the prohibition,
Even the
right?
Rockefellers and them dudes. I mean, there was all kind of bootlegging going on
They were all
from
doing it. Like
rich
it was
white people today. You know what I'm saying?
right.
They
So in
lineages.
1933, the amendment was appealed, and
Yeah.
alcohol was something that could be
And it,
legally
I just
right.
want to add to why he was probably involved because of his moral perspective with what would
Mm-hmm.
Jesus would do. The
Mm-hmm.
feminist movement was heavily behind prohibition because women were complaining. Their main point was men were coming home and all they did was drink and beat
Yeah.
us and
Yeah.
not care for us.
Well.
They were losing their jobs during the Great Depression, and they were just drinking and they were
Yeah.
living immorally. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of push behind that where women were coming together and activists and pastors and hence your boy here, Charles Sheldon.
Yeah. No, I mean this is important to understand it. Like his perspective on what would Jesus do, and his really firm belief in it was so significant that
Yeah,
it spawned movements that had an amendment,
that changed
criminalized
society.
alcohol.
Changed
It changed
society.
society.
Yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
100%. Like this is incredible when you think about it.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
people call the social gospel, one of the originators of it was this guy, and it
I
wasn't
mean,
about
boot,
socialism.
bootlegging was international. You know,
That
this
joint
was
was
tied to
international.
England, China, everywhere.
Big
It
money.
was, yeah, big
Big money.
money.
So he's significant, all right? So, but in 1998, 1988 is when it started to so it kind of fell off for a while, right? So you get, he eventually dies, and the temperance movement, a lot happens in American evangelicalism. We talked a lot about that in season 3 with on the episode with Luke. I forgot what a lot of that history of American
Yeah,
evangelicalism
yeah.
in the 20th century, the 1900s. We've already discussed that, but a lot happened during that time, and so this movement sort of became, because it allowed for a lot of the laws allowed for the mafia and a lot of violence. The social gospel also kind of got a bad rap. So you had the fundamentalist side of things was like, no, let's get back to the, it became progressive, like we don't deal with civilian affairs, right? While the
Right.
fundamentalists moved away from the culture, these people were transitioning, and this is where you get Harold Ockenga, Billy Graham, and these guys
Mm-hmm.
try to create a neo evangelicalism. Evangelicalism was split. Some were saying that's social, we don't deal with that. But then some were saying, no, how do we not take what we know from the scriptures and apply it in society, right? So there was
Right.
that rift. So it was gone for a while. And then in 1988, that's when it starts to come back. It starts to come back in the Midwest. Ironically, this guy, Charles Sheridan, was from Topeka, Kansas. That same area is where it started to come back again. So in 1988, the first bracelets were made. They were made in this town by a church, Central Wesleyan Church in Holland, Michigan, right? They started doing these little bracelets, and it was a youth pastor who just really wanted to try to get his kids to really follow Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So he creates these bracelets, and then all of a sudden they start catching on. And other churches are like, hey, what are those bracelets that you guys have? But the bracelets weren't WWJD, it was what would Jesus do, right? So it was like they're catching on, and this guy's like, wait a minute. Churches are starting to contact me and ask me like about these bracelets, but it's really the ideology. We're trying to
Right.
get the ideology of what would Jesus do out there. So as he is working on this idea, he bases it, he's aware of Charles Sheldon. As he's working on this and his teens are really loving it, he decides, you know what, this might be bigger than what I'm thinking. So he contacts a friend of his who worked for a company called Packard Advertising, tells him about the idea, and his name is Dan Seaborn. So Dan Seaborn is the pastor who kind of started it. He contacts a guy that it's actually his brother-in-law, and he works for Mike Freestone, and they start developing these things and shipping them out to people. So three men all of a sudden think, hey, this is a profitable idea.
Yeah.
They acronym what would Jesus do to WWJD, right? They acronym it to that, and they start selling the slogan to churches who are benefiting from this. Started with a minimum order of 100 of these. Listen to this. Listen to these numbers. It started with a minimum order, and here's what they said. After the positive reception by Dan's church, Ken thought, hey, I bet other churches would like these too. So in 1990, he sent promotional brochures to a number of churches throughout the U.S., and he ended up selling a few thousand bracelets that way. So it went from 100 to a few thousand, right? In the next 3 years, the WWJD bracelets blew up, right? It started to become hats, shirts, buttons, coffee mugs, but the bracelets were the most popular. In 1993, Ken sold the company sold his idea to a company called Lezo Corp, right? His brother stayed on staff with the company, and then by 1996, they were shipping these to Christian retailers all over the world. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, the product received such a promotional push that by the spring of 1997, they had sold 15 million bracelets.
That's wild. That's wild.
So it started with 100. 7 years later, they sold 15 million bracelets that said WWJD, right? It's on coffee mugs. It's everywhere. This thing is
Yeah.
just blowing up. Now, can you imagine if you're a believer, especially if you have the Paul Philippians 1 mindset, you're thinking, man, people are wearing, and what was wild about it was it crossed over. It was
Yeah.
not just a Christian thing. Brandon alluded to this in the he made a comment a few minutes ago, but yeah, they had. I remember there was a Sports Illustrated cover of Allen Iverson, tatted up, cornrows, with his arm like this, and he had a WWJD bracelet on. This is
Yeah.
Allen Iverson, bro.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he knows Jesus now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But so this is blown up. Like it crossed over to such a big deal. You had movies. It was incredible. The world embraced WWJD
For
as a
sure.
concept. In fact, listen to this. The bracelets were of the greatest profit, right? But outside Christian circles, it creeped into the secular world, even though the message was explicitly Christian. High profile retailers like Walmart, Hallmark, and Barnes and Noble started stocking WWJD bracelets. Okay. Gas stations had them. They could be spotted on the wrists of celebrities like Allen Iverson, we talked about. Mainstream media outlets like CNN and Fox reported on the growing trend like this was insane. They couldn't believe it. WWJD had gotten so popular and it was such a normal part of the American lexicon, right? An acronym became a normal part of the American lexicon. Kind of like
Yeah.
when Cash Money around that same time, Cash Money had that bling bling. Remember
Bling
that?
bling.
Bling
Yeah.
bling. Every time I come into my city, bling bling, pinky ring, ring. That's bling is became in the America. It's in the dictionary, lexicon, right?
That's wild.
WWJD had blown up, and it wasn't just in commercial success. In fact, listen to this. Even it shaped political campaigns and movements. Candidates and organizations and groups used it to justify their positions, gain votes, or raise awareness for particular issues. For example, in the 2000 presidential campaign, Al Gore said several times that he was driven in his personal life by the question, what would Jesus do? And the same question, that same question would influence his policy and decisions, right? Fast forward 11 years to November 11th, November 2011. Remember the Occupy London? Remember when it was Occupy Wall Street?
Yep.
Occupy was everywhere, right? Occupy London had a big flying giant banner that said, what would Jesus do? Right? It was drawing attention to all the suffering that people were going through. You had you had stuff like who would Jesus bomb? What would Jesus cut from the budget? It just got incredibly insane. It was amazing, right? So what happened? As recent as 2011, what's that, 11 years ago?
Yep.
It was used as a major campaign to push back against Wall Street, right? What would Jesus do? And all of a sudden, it was gone. Just like that, it was gone. So, what happened to WWJD? Well, obviously, commercialization, right? The commercialization of it. In November 2002, there was an evangelical environmental network launched an ad campaign featuring the slogan, what would Jesus drive, right? And this was their point. Jim Ball was the American Baptist minister. He was responsible for the ad, and he said, Jesus wants his followers to drive the least polluting, most efficient vehicle that truly meets their needs. He'd definitely be in favor of public transportation, right? So you had stuff like that happening. You had in February 2011, Sojourners placed a full page ad in Politico, emblazoned with the slogan, "What would Jesus cut?" It was signed by 28 Christian leaders, and the ad was passed, was given to the House as they passed a budget to that disproportionately cut programs to the poor, such as child health care programs, international aid, while increasing military spending and tax cuts for the rich, right? So they started this, what would Jesus cut? So all of a sudden, this idea of what would Jesus do, how would Jesus respond, what would Jesus drive, it got so commercialized that the world, I think, just had enough.
Yeah.
I think the world was like, you know what? We don't even follow Jesus like that. Like the world, I think, just got tired because if you think about it, it was basically an ethical idea, even though it was commercial and you had people that didn't believe in it, who were living lifestyles that definitely contradicted what would Jesus do. That was clear. But there was still an ethical element to the reality.
Right.
You cannot mention Jesus and not have some element of ethics attached to it. You just
Yeah, I
can't.
mean, yeah, I mean, the statement itself lends to that reality. Like you're asking, what would Jesus do? That means that Jesus is the standard by which I'll determine what I should do in any given moment. So
100.
Jesus became the standard. You know what I'm saying? Even though
Mm-hmm.
nobody wanted Jesus to be the standard.
Right, because it's stuff. See, at first it was cute, right? Oh, this is a cool bracelet. Just like the idea of it, and you, just like in the rap world, right? We talked about this before, right? Just like rappers get like these Jesus pieces, diamond flooded
Right.
Jesus piece, right?
Right.
It's like it's all cool when you do that, or you say clever lines, like as you think like, oh, okay, we gonna send a lot and hope Christ forgive us, Jay-Z and more,
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got all this type of stuff. This idea of Jesus was like, hey, we like Jesus as a fad. We don't like Jesus as a moral ideology, as a moral ethic,
Right.
as
I
someone we have
mean,
to submit to.
with something like that, even the bad guy can wear it, and it
Right.
gives him a good look. You know what I'm
100%.
saying? Like that's just the reality.
I can't prove this, but I think there was a rise in religious tattoos during that period. You get
Probably.
either the hands with the rosary. A lot of people were getting Jesus tattoos, big angels on their back. And I
Yeah.
remember there being, just in the hood at least, there was a surge of religious tattoos because what would Jesus do became a trend that people, the world accepted until it began to be really used in an ethical way, in a moral way,
Right.
when it was challenging now how you drive, what you do, what should you cut, all of that. Then it became the world got tired of submitting to an ideology that they don't believe in, and they got
Yeah.
tired of submitting to a Jesus that they don't believe in, and
For
that makes
sure.
sense. So that's what happened in the world. Here's the question that we want to pose tonight. The real question for us is what happened in the church? What happened to what would Jesus do in the actual church?
Hmm.
What happened?
What
Now,
were
when
the
I
effects
came
of?
into,
I was just saying, what were the effects of it?
yeah, what's the legacy of it? What was the impact?
Yeah.
Well, let me just start with what was good. I think what would Jesus do? WWJD was well intentioned, and I appreciate what Charles Sheldon was able to do and how it provoked us. Like, what would Jesus do provoked a lot of people, Christian and non-Christian, but primarily believers, to think about what would Jesus do, to think about that question. And I think it gave people, because during that same period was a rise in like the purity culture, right?
Hmm.
There was I think for some reason, well, actually I know why I think, but the church is constantly looking for validation from the world. Like it's okay if you believe that, right? So when WWJD was accepted in the culture, late '80s and the '90s, all of a sudden we're not like weirdos anymore. Now I wasn't really a believer back then, but Christians really felt that we're not weirdos, and so you saw this rise in a commitment to purity. You got a rise in a commitment to not dating, and you have all these sort of ethical, moral things that seem to be cool, like this, the purity stuff, the virginity, like say, all this stuff was rising to the surface, and believers were emboldened because even in the world, WWJD was accepted. And I don't know if Christians thought, man, we've arrived and this is how it's always going to be, but that's just not the case.
Right.
And so, but a lot happened. So there was a lot of good that happened. I think there was a sensitivity to things. But if you look at now, if you look at today, look at this same church today, and you think, man, this doesn't seem like there's a sensitivity to what Jesus would do now. I mean, in all honesty, if that was a mindset that people had, we would have seen a lot different activity the last 10 to 12 years.
For sure. I mean, in one sense, the bracelets gave you the concept, or at least helped you grasp the concept of Jesus's omnipresence. The Lord's omnipresence. The fact that he sees all things, knows all things. Like when you look down at that bracelet, I remember thinking, yo, like the Lord is watching right now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
that's real. That was one of the positive effects of it, I think, was it had us thinking more about, or at least establishing a habit of considering the fact that we are Coram Deo, before the face of God. I think that was one of the positive effects of what it did. And the bracelets looked, kind of cool for a time. Like there was mad different colors. Like cats would wear them on the basketball court. Like you said,
you have
AI
one? Did
was
you ever
rocking
wear one?
them. Oh yeah, I definitely had a few of them.
I never
joints.
wore one, but
yeah, I had a few of them joints. I mean, you're talking about back in 96, 97, 98. That was they was still a thing somewhat. So yeah,
That's real. All right, so that was the good side of it. But here's the thing that I think I've observed. I think what would Jesus do in an unintentional way paved the way for a lot of the division that we see today. I think a lot of the bitterness and anger that we saw manifested in through social justice and politics. I think the of it, the seed of it, though well intentioned, I think the fruit of it. There's a couple things that the phrase and the people, Christians who stood by that phrase, didn't really take into account. And I think where we're at right now as a church is largely connected to the way believers try to apply what would Jesus do, WWJD. So I want to give four things of what I think, and obviously, Strizzy, you weigh in. Here was the first problem. So we looked at all the things that were good, and I'm grateful for the phrase, and it was well intentioned. I think it did a lot of good. Here's one of the main problems. One of the first problems of WWJD is that it was impossible. It's impossible to know what Jesus would do. It's impossible to know what he would do. And without meaning to do this, I think it created. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand we want to have the mind of Christ, right? I get that. I get those things. I get this. The certain emphasis. We want to be like Jesus. But what happened was it actually created, in many ways, an improper balance, right? It created an arrogance that we can actually know what Jesus would do when the people in the scriptures that were with him day and night didn't know what Jesus would do.
Right.
They had no clue, right? So a couple examples, right? So Jesus is teaching. He's teaching people. He's on a boat. And I think this is John 14. Matthew 14. And so Jesus is teaching, and then there's thousands of people in front of him. So the disciples come to him and say, listen, it's getting dark. These people need to eat. They got long journeys. You need to send them folks away so they can go get some food. And what does Jesus say? You feed them. And the disciples are like, come again? It was like, you feed them. And then we're like, Lord, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. So Jesus is like, all right, sit everybody down in groups of 50 and let's do it. All right. The disciples had no clue what was going on. That the last thing they would have thought of was like, hey, Jesus, we gonna feed these folks, right?
Right.
They didn't know what Jesus would do. They had no clue. You got another scene in Matthew 8. Jesus is asleep on the boat, right? The boat is rocking back and forth. They're terrified, the disciples. They go wake Jesus up. He's like, what you waking me up for? Didn't you know that you would be safe with me? Like,
Right.
what are you talking about? They had no clue what Jesus would do. In John 10, like they're telling him, don't go up to this festival. And he's like, I'm not going to go to the festival. I'm not going to go. And then he shows up at the festival, right? They had no clue what Jesus would do. So if the people that were close to Jesus, who saw him, who touched him, who ate with him, who learned from him, who he actually gave the power to do the very same miracles, cast out the same demons as them, if they didn't know what he would do, how can we know that 2,000 years later, not even nearly as close to Jesus as these people were?
Yeah, I mean it leaves room, or it kind of catapults you into a state of self-righteousness, really.
Right.
If you think about the statement itself, and then
100%.
considering a finite mind that is subject in its perspective, looking at a situation from that subjectivity and stating, what would Jesus do in this scenario?
The objective,
Yeah,
omnipotent,
exactly.
omniscient God, right?
Right. So, but my finite mind is somehow supposed to be able to grasp from what I've accumulated from Scripture about the things He's done. Somehow, what would Jesus do in any given situation? That's where it causes so many issues, because once you've embraced this, I can do this mentality, I can make objective decisions like Jesus and make the right decisions. Now all of a sudden, anyone who disagrees with you, I mean, you're basically the guy running around saying, God told me. So God told me,
Yeah.
it's the same guy.
Yeah. And so, you know what it was? And again, there's a lot of good things that happen. We've already covered that. But what it did was it created, in a sense, a individualistic Gnosticism,
For
right?
sure. Yep.
It's that's what I'm using a broader term to say. It's an individualistic Gnosticism.
Yeah.
Like, I have this sense of, I know what Jesus would do, and this is it. So even in the thing, Jesus would want his people to drive these kind of cars and do this. And what if Jesus wouldn't want you to have a car?
Right.
What do you mean, fam? You know what I'm saying? Jesus would want you not to cut taxes from the poor. What if Jesus wanted them to cut taxes from the poor so that the church could learn how to be more giving?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that local churches would start taking up the welfare of their local communities instead of blaming it, waiting for the government, right? You just don't know. And I think there is, and we know this from the scriptures. They thought Jesus was going to be a militaristic king like David.
For sure.
That's why the son of David, and this understanding of, they were looking for that. They wanted him to be like Barabbas.
He was coming to deliver them from worldly oppression.
Yeah. So they just, and remember when they were like, when he came to Nazareth and they were like, hold up, this is who Jesus, this is the one who's doing all this stuff? Mm-hmm. Don't we know him? Did he grow up here? Don't we know his father and his sisters and brothers? Like, and he's like, he couldn't do any miracles there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like he couldn't do any miracles. So it's impossible to know as well-intentioned as it is, it created an individualistic arrogance, right? That you could understand what God would do just based on that. Now, it said, we don't get me wrong, we understand, be imitators of God. We get that, right? Mm-hmm. Follow me as I follow Christ from Paul. We get that, right? We get Jesus saying, greater works than these that people. We understand that, but really, what happened was people thought, okay, this is what Jesus would do, and in reality, Jesus may have never wanted you in the situation in the first place.
Right.
Right. So that leads to the second thing that we've kind of overlapped, but it leads to the second reason why I think it set us up to be in the place that we are now as a church. What would Jesus do? It put emphasis on what he would do instead of what he said
Mm-hmm.
do. So when the emphasis is on what would Jesus do, what action would he take, it took away from, well, what did he say do?
That's right.
Right? We're not called to do everything that Jesus would do. You know, we're that's not what we what we do. We're to do what did Jesus say do. See, you should have said WWJSD,
Right.
or WDJSD. What did Jesus say do?
Or
When it put the emphasis on what
WWJC.
his actions were,
What
it,
did
it, it elevated what people do.
Yeah.
It elevated what people do instead of what Jesus said. Like it's what people would do. And let me tell you why it became dangerous. Because when you look at the things that Jesus did, things like go against the Pharisees, right? Flipping over tables. You know what I'm saying? Like those are the things, and I'm going to come back to that. But like there are things that Jesus did that we're just not going to do. So there was a misinterpretation of the greater works than these will other people do. Jesus wasn't saying people will do greater works than telling someone to Lazarus come back from the dead after 4 days. He meant the gospel will spread in ways significantly through the hands of ordinary men that it wouldn't if he didn't die and do that. So when he said greater works than these, it meant the multiplication of the gospel and the morality that it comes with, not necessarily people going to be doing all these miracles. See, he wasn't thinking supernatural. Jesus was thinking, well, supernatural in the sense that salvation is supernatural. But
Yeah, I
it
mean there was
wasn't,
supernatural things happening, but he was referencing impact.
yes,
Impact that
yes.
would be made.
When he said greater works than these, he wasn't talking about people would be walking on water and doing more than that. He was saying that the impact of him and his teaching and people's faith in that would affect a lot of people.
Right.
But when the emphasis is on what would Jesus do, you can easily forget what he said.
Yeah.
And
I mean
so
you're
now
going
you're trying to
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say you're going from something that leaves you to answer the question
Right,
versus the question is already answered. I
right.
mean, when you ask what has Jesus said, the answer is in what you search when you search the scripture to
100.
find out what he said. You have an answer there that's not ambiguous. It's not up to you guessing. So when you ask what would Jesus do, you got to guess the answer. You're
Right.
you're basically left to determine what you believe Jesus would do.
Yeah. And so that's a great point. And another thing that it did was, and I know you frozen Strat because your
Yeah,
face
I
looks
got you.
crazy right now. But that's some duck faces I be talking about them. But one of the other things it did by doing that, by asking what would Jesus do, it turned the Bible into a book where everything Jesus did is prescription and not description. That's what happens. It set in motion for the Bible to be this rule book that answers every question, right? Like, oh, what would Jesus do? Oh, so a situation comes up and you're not sure what you should do. Well, what would Jesus do? Oh,
Right.
okay. That's just not how the Bible works,
Yeah.
right? That's not how it works. We discern the will of God, right? We discern that. But when you create an ideology that teaches you that, oh, it's just as simple as knowing what Jesus would do, you take the Bible and turn it into all those stories describing things that he did become prescription. Oh, we need to do this. And it's like, whoa, that's not what the Bible is. You've affected how we read our Bibles and what we should do to understand what our role is in the church.
Right.
It's been convoluted because now the Bible becomes a prescription of what Jesus would do, not what Jesus said though, what he would do. It messed us up to Strack need to get that. He need to get that Verizon. He need to get that Fios, man. Stop playing with that mom and pop Lancaster Wi-Fi, man. That's what's killing him right now. That Wi-Fi is hurting him. But that's what it did. So it creates this Bible that's almost kind of Jeffersonian, right? You guys know the Jefferson Bible was a Bible that he created where he ripped out all the parts that he didn't like and constructed a Bible out of that. And now, in that Bible, you can see it in like Bible museums. I saw it in the Bible Museum in DC. It just he created his own version of the Bible, and what it did was it created, in a sense, its own version of the Bible because Jesus became somewhat of an application rather than, okay, what is he telling me to do? What is Jesus saying I should do? And I think it caused significant impact to how we understand our Bibles, but also what we expect to learn from our Bibles. Let's just be honest. If you're a genuine believer, you know that, and you've been a believer longer than a couple minutes, you know that at times following the Lord is a persevering, hoping, trusting task that is largely based on the morality of the gospel and not necessarily the application of should I buy this home or take this job or should I give this person money? You know, it's the morality of it. The theology informs our morality. So yeah, you can know what would Jesus do. If it was sin, it was easy to answer that question. But when it becomes like, should he fire this person, hire this person? Should we do that? You just don't know. So what would Jesus do? In the Bible becomes like you're looking for things, and the application of these things is stuff that we just can't do, right? Which leads me to the third thing I overlapped before. What would Jesus do? And we've kind of alluded to this, but it didn't take into account the sinfulness of the human heart. It just didn't. It didn't take into account. Because the Jesus that what he did that people wanted to do, the sinfulness of our heart is to dominate, is to be, not every person is this way, but the sinfulness of our hearts is to control, is to dominate, is to rule, is to
Selfishness.
be selfish, right? It's to think
Yeah.
of ourselves. Or arrogance, to prop up ourselves, right?
Yep.
So ironically, even, you probably heard this plenty of times from different people, but there was like a lot of people loved imitating proverbially Jesus flipping over the tables, right? I remember people in the last 10 years, I remember watching different people who were for or against social justice act like they're flipping over. They would be rude, arrogant, mean-spirited towards fellow believers and would use them flipping over the table. I saw many arguments like, bro, you can't do that. Well, Jesus flipped over tables in the temple.
Right.
It's like, fam, Jesus was morally perfect. Everything he did was what was the will of the Father. Every word, every attitude, all of these things. We're not morally perfect. So
Not at
when we
all.
flip over tables, proverbially speaking, we're doing it probably because we're offended, we're self-righteous. Like what WWJD didn't take into account, believers didn't take into account the just sinfulness of the selfishness of our own hearts.
Hmm.
There's a reason why, isn't it amazing that Jesus reduced he reduced obedience down to two things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And we
Right.
can't do either of those things. We can't do
Not
those two
not
things.
not of our own volition. Nah.
Not of our own
Not of
volition.
our own power. Yeah.
And I don't think we do them that often. I don't think I love my neighbor as myself all the time, ever, ever. I think there are actions where I do that. There are actions where I
Right.
do that. But I think as an ideology, as a functioning ideology, where I'm constantly loving, I don't think so. I don't think so. And so I don't think you do it either. So again, and by you, I mean everyone who's watching, not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
Strack or whoever. It's like, I don't think we just don't do it. And so it doesn't take into account the sinfulness of the heart. People want to imitate when Jesus went hard against the Pharisees and pushed back and said this and did that. But why don't people imitate John 8 when he said to the adulterous woman, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no
Be-
more.
because things that convict don't get no click. You know what I'm
Right?
saying?
Things that convict don't get clicks.
That's right.
That's it. So again, what you have is this lack of understanding of the human condition. Even after being a Christian, we have to battle for like, it's not like you get saved and now you just no, it takes effort. It takes work. It takes renewing your mind, right? You would think WWJD renews our mind, but what it did was it freed our mind to act in ways that we think justify our actions because we think it's what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
And I can't prove this, but I wouldn't be surprised how many people, people that, well, I just heard from the Lord. I think it's from the Lord. The Lord, I wonder how much of that was uh, freed up by this idea. Oh, this is what Jesus would do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, fam. I'll tell you a story. This is a story that happened. This is a real story. A girl was, not a girl, she was a woman. She was in my church, and she would have been seen. Her and her husband were members. Her husband was a little awkward, and he would sometimes come and sometimes not. But she was seen as someone who was mature in the Lord. She sang in worship. She would have been someone who people thought was mature. One day, after worship practice, she comes to the worship leader and says, "Hey, this is my last Sunday singing. The Lord told me that I have an idol of serving and I need to step down and leave the church." And I was like,
Okay.
huh? So I didn't hear this directly. I'd heard it from my worship leader and then my colleague who I pastored with. This is what she said. So my colleague was going to meet with her. So this was on Sunday this happened. So he was meeting with her on Wednesday. So it was Wednesday, he and I were talking. And he said he was about to get in that meeting with her. And I said, "Hey, bro, do you mind if I sit in on that meeting? Like, I don't have to say nothing. You can lead it. But can I just sit in? Because that just seems odd to me that she would say that." And he said, "Yeah." So we go to the meeting, and she is convinced that the Lord told her this is what Jesus would do. And this is what he wanted her to do. So I said, "Well, what did he actually say to you?" And I said, "You heard this in an audible voice." She was like, "Absolutely." She said, "He said, you have an idol of serving and you need to step down, leave Solid Rock and go to other churches and serve in those churches and not Solid Rock. It's my church, Solid Rock." So I said, "Okay." So I said, this is exact. I almost did it verbatim. I always do this when people say that they've got it from the Lord. Here's what I say. I say, "Lord, you know that I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to disobey you. So if what I think is wrong, please don't hold it against me as arrogance. I'm just trying to discern your will and serve our sister. So, Lord, in no way, if I'm off here, please overlook what I'm saying." And I just said to her, "Let me just ask you a question. Why do you think the Lord would tell you you have an idol of serving and to step down and leave our church, but go to other churches and serve there? Wouldn't that serve the same idol?" She thought about it. Said, maybe. And I just said, I could be wrong. I would go back and pray and ask the Lord if that's really him telling you. Because I was concerned that if she left, it would do damage to her situation, that we were
Right.
trying to help her with some other thing. Came back a couple of days later and says, "No, you were right. It wasn't from the Lord." But it was a shock to us that she was so adamant and so convinced that it was, that had we not met and had that kind of dialogue, she didn't want left. Now, eventually, she did end up leaving, and it was a bad situation for something totally different, unrelated. But it just to me, this confidence of I'm sure charismatics loved what Jesus did. It was, oh man, this is what
Oh
you.
yeah.
It's like it just the confidence. It just didn't take into consideration the heart
Nah.
and how we would respond to things. And then, and then one more thing, you alluded to this, Strack. It justified self-righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
I think it justified. So a lot of what we've seen, a lot of the anger and what's funny is we've seen a lot of this stuff before. Here's what puzzles me. We said this in the last episode. The Matthew 23, it just puzzles me how like it says the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. That frightens me, and not in like I'm afraid, but it sobers me. because it's like, listen, the fact that I can preach or am a pastor in the grand scheme of things doesn't mean anything unless my life and I'm faithful to that. The Lord can still, it's not like, oh, you're being unfaithful and you're destroyed. Like, he doesn't do that. He doesn't like strike us down when we sin, right? He'll let us keep going. How many times have we heard stories of pastors who were in adulterous situations for a long time? It's not like, oh, you got caught as soon as you did. Like nah, affairs for a year or two, still preaching. Like the Lord will let you still use the gifts that He's given you, even if you're living in sin, even if you're not going to be qualified to make it because your lifestyle is so crazy. So it's like this idea, or this I'm better than these people because I'm against social justice or I'm for social justice, and then it's Luke 18, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector all over again.
Yeah.
It's constantly what we see happening all the time. I mean, nowadays you can't even put a post up without someone being checking you on your on your perspective. And some of these people they're not even ushers in the church, right? It justified a lot of self-righteousness.
For sure.
It justified a lot of it. People started thinking they were doing what Jesus would do better than other people, right? So Jesus wouldn't do that. Do you know what's interesting? Many, and I didn't read like Shai's book. So Shai's book might have killed it. I didn't read every single book on all these topics. But when people are saying what is biblical justice, I've heard from voting and all these people, and I heard from Thabiti and all them. You know, the one thing that I thought, why does no one mention, like, why are you quoting a passage from Deuteronomy, right? When you say what's biblical justice, what most dudes do is they look in their logos, they type in the word justice in search, and they find all the places that it says it, primarily in the Old Testament, and then they use it as an interpretation for right now, as here's the definition of biblical justice, right? I don't remember anyone saying, hey, Jesus is actually the definition of justice, biblically speaking. Like Jesus fulfilled the command of doing justice perfectly. So why don't we look at what Jesus did and what he said and at least get a definition from that? Like that just didn't happen. It was
You know,
all like, go ahead.
one of the things that comes to mind is not even in scripture do we have from any of the writers any type of audacity to presume what God would do in a given situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have that from the writers in scripture. You have cries like, Lord, search my heart, you
Mm-hmm.
know, deliver me from my enemies,
Mm-hmm.
all these different cries depending upon the Lord and his sovereignty and his omniscience. Um, Never do you see someone presuming the ability to assume what God would do. You just don't have it. It's not even something that we're supposed to ask ourselves. What would God do here? You know what
You
I'm
know the only
saying?
time
Like,
you know the only time you saw it clearly was in the garden.
yeah,
Did God really say?
right,
No, God knows that you won't be like that. You won't die, and you will.
right,
It was satanic when you start talking about what God thinks.
yeah,
I mean, to your point, how many verses do you hear like, "What is man that he who is like?" Look at Job, right? To your point, Job 37 to 41. Those
right,
chapters are nothing but God saying, you don't know what I would do and can't think. You have verses like, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts and my ways are not your ways.
yeah.
To your point, it's like,
Who
wow,
can know the mind of God? You
who
know,
can know the mind of God?
yeah. And as Christians, we know that we're led by the Holy Spirit through
Sure.
conviction, through the remembrance of the
First
Word.
Corinthians
He
2.
brings he brings these things to mind for us. But that's different than assuming you can somehow conjure up from within yourself this, you know, certainty on what God would do in any given situation. You're
Yeah,
talking about God,
right.
like there's a chasm between you and God that only Christ can fill. You know what I'm saying? Your mind and your feeble way of thinking is not possible. It is not possible for you to fill that chasm. Christ has filled that chasm. So
And bro,
yeah,
that's why I think it's just, while it meant well, I think it was well intended by Charles Sheldon and others. I
yeah,
think it really became, and really just, without, not people saying, well, what would Jesus do? But this confidence that really we shouldn't have in what Jesus would do. It's like, okay, this is what I think I should do based on what he says. It's
right,
how I try to live. Right? It's not like, oh, this, oh, Jesus would definitely do this,
yeah,
say this. He just did stuff that was just crazy. But it created, it almost became like sort of a quasi doctrinal issue, right?
mm-hmm,
And a lot of the arguing and infighting is basically over interpretation of what Scripture says about this. And there are times when Scripture doesn't, is, we have to discern the will of the Lord, and we act in the moral sense. What fruit of the Spirit do we act? What Jesus would do is want you to act in the fruit of the Spirit, right?
right,
And that's what I mean. Like, where's what would Jesus do when there's all this arguing, right? All this name, all this sinning against each other, all this slander and gossip that people just call podcasts, and it's just slander and gossip about people, right? What would Jesus do? Would Jesus do that? Like, it's just not. But when you think, well, Jesus flipped over tables. Like, there's not one passage that says we're commanded to flip over tables
nah,
or anything like that. So the anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God requires. It's James 1:19-20, right? So again, when what would Jesus do takes precedence over what Jesus said do, it really paved the way for the division, a lot of the division that we see in the church.
and it's so much easier, to it lends to our procrastination, to our laziness. What would Jesus do requires you to do no research. It requires you to not search Jesus at all.
Don't
It
even
it it,
ask other people, right? You
it,
just
it
think
yeah,
about it.
it requires nothing of you except to make an abrupt decision and then attach it to God. This is
Yeah.
God told me to do this because what would Jesus do? Well, in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, he would do this because I know Jesus to be a philanthropist.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
Right.
doesn't matter what you throw in there. If you have a conjured up perspective of who Jesus is, what would Jesus do is based on that conjured up perspective of who
100.
Jesus is.
Yeah.
It's similar now with Kanye, like we keep mentioning him because he is such a big deal.
Yeah.
But with Jesus as king, sure, Jesus is put at the forefront, but the world is looking at Kanye and thinking, "Oh, this is how Christians act."
100.
This is the King Jesus he serves. I mean, nah, fam, it's not the same. But how would the world understand that? Unless we have those conversations. The same thing with Trump and anybody else, who would probably rock those bracelets.
But you know what though? That's what I mean. Like, so no one says what would Jesus do anymore, but we speak with a confidence. Remember all the people that said Trump is God's man,
Yeah, yeah.
he's going to win the election. I mean, that kind of so now we can let's spelunker just for a second, right? Let's
Sure,
just
sure.
spelunker for a second. So now when you get to this declaration of Trump and being God's man and he's going to win because he's got this, it's the force of what God has said, with
Right,
the confidence that God has chosen this man, that he is, and then when he doesn't win, no wonder there's outrage over the election.
right.
No
Because it was
wonder
God.
people just can't let it go.
Yeah,
It's like, listen, man, throw on some Teddy Pendergrass and think I better let it go.
right. I
And
mean, the
just
the concept of robbing God has been used to motivate people forever.
100%.
If you're robbing God of His America,
Yeah,
it's
that's it.
it goes both ways too, like we always do. I mean, when you're at a platform and you're saying if your church isn't preaching about social justice, then you need to leave that church. It's the same
It's
thing.
ridiculous, bro.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just, it's the arrogance that, now it's one thing to say, listen, and this is where that 1 Corinthians 12 is huge.
Mm-hmm.
1 Corinthians 12, listen, the body, like, hey, listen, you
Yep.
have a different function, a different priority than I do.
Yep.
That's fine. Like I said, you've heard me say this plenty of times. I don't go to abortion clinics, but I love that Norm and Los and other people do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go. I don't do that. I don't preach sermons on abortion, even though I think
Right.
it's deplorable.
Right.
I don't. That's not where I'm not drawn to that. The reason why we stay balanced is because I'm not going to choose a side and then bash the other side. But whenever I do that, whenever I have a tweet or a post that seems to, I get more followers. When I start bringing it back to convicting both sides, I lose followers, right? It
Mm-hmm.
just happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm not going to be, but again, this force of what Jesus would do became quasi doctrinal. It
Yes.
became the emphasis and the authority in which, and the reason why it's important why we're talking about this is because there are leaders that instruct other people.
Right.
We talked about this last week with John MacArthur. It's like you're instructing other people with a confidence that this man is going to be president,
Mm-hmm.
that this is going to happen. You got to talk about this. If you're not talking about this, then you're not really a believer. Like,
Yeah.
really? If you don't vote this way, then you're not really, fam?
You got I mean, all the way around, we could sit and talk about this forever because all the way around you have this destructive thing, because what would Jesus do? You would be stepping in the shoes of Jesus.
100%.
That'd be like me being on a squad with Jordan and being like, well, what would Jordan do in this situation?
Yeah.
I'm not Jordan. I can't do what he can do. Like, it's not what he would do, it's what would he have me do? What would he have me do in this situation based on what I know he's said and what he's
Right.
done? What would
And
he
that's
have
it.
me do?
That's the phrase. Based
Yeah.
on what I know he said,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Not based on, but again, but when you think you know what Jesus would do, you can even twist what he said, right?
For
To your
sure.
advantage. And that's the spirit. That's the spirit of division. The
The
spirit
problem with your
of
Jesus is your
your
Jesus.
Jesus. That's the problem, right? The problem with your Jesus is your Jesus. That's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. And that's what I think the world struggles with. That's what
Yeah.
the world struggles with. The problem with your Jesus is that you're Jesus. And
That's
we've
right.
seen that happen all across the board. So, what would Jesus do? WWJD meant well, well intentioned, definitely was. But what it turned into, because of the things we listed, I think it just paved the way, unintentionally, paved the way for a lot of the division. And people, and this is the thing. I was talking to someone else earlier about this. What me and Strack, the reason why we hit this stuff is because we I think people have this is how I think people think about the culture. This is what I think. I'm not the Lord, so I don't know this, but this is what I think. I think when stuff is crazy, like all of the politics or all of the social justice stuff, and it dies down, everyone thinks like, all right, well, like people think like because you're tired of it, or some of the other people are tired of it, and you're not seeing it as much on your feed anymore, they're like, okay, we're over it, it's done.
Right.
That's how I think people think.
The algorithms
I,
tell you what's important.
the algorithms tell you what's important, right? You listen to the algorithms. The reality is, and this is going to be an episode. This might be. I want to do an episode on the ideology of fake news. Bro. We we gonna get it in on this one, but I'll just say this: everyone thinks like I think a lot of people think like, all right, we're past it, we're tired of it, no one's caring about it. Who cares about it? But the reality is I think Trump is going to run for president in 2024. And
Yeah.
even
I
if
mean,
he
he
doesn't, whoever runs for the Republican side is going to need to be in the spirit of the fiery kind of say whatever
I think he's
Trump,
already accumulating some candidates as running mates.
bro,
He already said
100%
Mike Pence is out. So
is out. He's a coward to them peoples. Listen, if he doesn't die and the Lord doesn't make him stand before him for judgment, he's going to run again if there's no health. And he's going to win. Whoever runs for president on the Republican side is going to win. The Democrats have done a horrible job, and they've been everything that the conservatives said they were going to be and worse in this situation. And we're only in year 2.
right.
This is going to be a travesty. The Republicans are going to walk away with the election as if no one else ran. When Trump runs again, all of the anger, the judgments of all of the accusations of if you vote for him, you support white supremacy, all of that's going to come right back up. But it's going to come back even stronger. You know why? Because we've already been here before. and people have just been stewing over it quietly, and many believers have just been like, okay, it's over, no one's talking about it anymore, no one's done. And I assure you, brothers and sisters, I believe this. I hope I am wrong. Man, do I hope I'm wrong about this. But I until I'm proven wrong, I am confident that when the next election cycle shows up in late 2023, in mid 2023, going into 2024, we're going to see another explosion in the evangelical church over race, politics. It's going to be right back. But people now, it's like re-injuring a wound. You know how when you twist your ankle and
Yeah.
then you get through it, and then 6 months later you twist that same ankle, and that joint is like, dag, you re-injured the
Yep.
same end. That joint hurts worse
Yeah.
because it was already hit. People are wounded and are injured because we really didn't solve anything. We just let it dissolve. Nothing has been solved. It's
Pretty
just
much.
dissolved. And so now it's like when it all comes back, it's shaking up a soda and twisting the top off. Boom! And it's going to be there. Mark my words. This is why with the stuff that we're talking about, I believe is important. It may sound like, I love this. I'm putting this up here, Kira. Kira said, relapses are always worse than the original addiction. Facts.
Hmm.
So let's make that biblical, right? Let's make that biblical. When Jesus told the parable of the demon, right, who gets out of the house is swept clean and put in order, but nothing's there in its place. What does it say happened? That demon comes back with 7 demons more powerful than itself,
Yep.
and then that man is worse off than he was at the beginning.
Yep.
I think that is a prophetic parable of the evangelical church that we're going to see happen. There's going to be a relapse because there's nothing's been solved, it's just dissolved. And it's going to bubble up and then bam. And the arrogance to come. So what me and Strack are trying to do is whoever will listen, just don't fall for it.
Yeah.
Don't fall for the allegiance to these people and more than Christ. I'm not saying we don't love people. I'm not saying we don't have people's backs. I'm just saying I'm not going to love someone so much that if you love someone and want to defend them so much, backtrack. If you're willing to sin to demonstrate your loyalty to someone, then you are disloyal to the Lord.
I mean, the
If
Lord
you're
said
willing to
you
sin,
must even hate father and mother. Like you,
100%.
that's close people. That's people
That's
that are close to you.
bro.
You
That's
gotta be willing to.
fam
You gotta be willing to lose them for His sake.
for His sake.
Like
If your
you got.
loyalty is so strong for a person or to a cause that you're willing to act outside of the fruits of the spirit that God said act in, you've crossed the line.
It's idolatry.
It's idolatry, 100%. And I don't care whose side you're on. And we try to stay in the middle, and this is why we just get hit from both sides, and I just accept it. It's just it. Just hit me. But someone's going to listen. We have people who listen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening and downloading. We have people to listen. And that's what we're at. So
Word up.
we're always going to give it to you raw. We are going to do this episode, though. I want to talk about the ideology of fake news, those 2 words. Those 2 words have done, and it's not about Trump, but it's we're going to discuss this. I think this is our next episode. We're going to discuss this reality because I think those 2 words did a ton of damage for different reasons, and they were true. There were times Trump was right when he said it, but there was something that happened because of how frequently he said it in the culture that we're in. We're in a culture of significant Christian immaturity. Significant. And we're all immature on some level. But a lot of the leaders that we espouse, that we look to, that we take our cues from, they have failed us. They failed us. So trust your pastor. Thank your local pastors, your local deacons, your local elders, your
Yes.
leaders. trust them, because they're the ones that are going to pray for you when you need help. They're the ones that are going to meet with you when you need
That's
help.
right. They're the ones the Lord has put in your life.
100%. Strizzy Strack, what's up with the next videos? What's popping? What we doing? What we doing, man? I'm tired of waiting. What we doing?
I'm still waiting to get that next edit, man. But I did announce yesterday that Luxurious is the joint we're doing the video for. So I'm tight. I'm tight about it. I'm a little anxious. I'm ready to because you got your vision, and you want it to come across right, and it's in
Right.
the hands of the editor. It's in the hands of the one putting the shots together and everything, and you don't always see things the same way. So you got to kind of present it as clear as possible for the person who's doing the magic, who's putting it together. So I hope I've done that with Lou as much as possible. I'm waiting to get the next edit back, and hopefully we'll have that joint up as soon as I think that joint looks popping, we putting it up ASAP.
Appreciate that, Reno. Appreciate that. Share that next episode. Share this episode. Let's get it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We love you. Join us on Patreon. Listen,
Yes.
Patreon.com/cross-examine. We'd love to have y'all join us. I'm not going to even pretend. We don't do that much on Patreon, but we do a lot of stuff here, and we got some stuff coming up. I've been joking about the game shows. I might try to do Guess Who's Back for real. I might try to do it. But we definitely going to do a hip-hop game show, an internet hip-hop game show that I'm excited about, and I'm working on, because to do this is massive. I'm working with some people to help me do this, and I'm going to put like a quiz out there and all of that stuff to see how many people can answer certain questions, because I don't want you to get on the show and not know what you're talking about. You got to go beyond 2016, baby. You got to go earlier than Young Jeezy to be able to do this joint. So we're gonna talk about that. But don't think Guess Who's Back is not gonna happen. It might be your back that's on the screen one day, and people are guessing. I'm Kirk Kennedy. He's Strack the Wolverine.
Yeah.
And we are out of here, y'all, man. Thanks for riding with us, son. If you're listening on as you do on the audio side, thank you so much for riding with us. We appreciate the downloads you give us still. We still been bojangling on the channel, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there one show at a time. We're going to get this. I mark my words. 10 years from now, we're going to have 1,000 followers. We're going to get there. Now, we're going to take it more serious this summer. I've just been busy, and you've been busy, but we're going to get to it. But we appreciate y'all, man. Thanks for riding.